everybody. Shalom Aleichem. Good evening. I want to thank everyone who's gracing us with their presence today. The leaders of this amazing, incredible community, educators, principals, mentors, directors of schools, synagogues, rabbis, friends, activists, all those involved in VEKOAJ. Thank you for the opportunity and the privilege to address you on this critical topic of the safety of our children, physical safety, emotional safety, psychological safety, emotional safety, sexual safety, and spiritual safety. There's a very, I want to start off with a simple question. You know, every Jewish holiday, every Shabbat, we read the Torah. With Shabbat, simple, go through the whole Torah from the beginning till the end. With holidays, you have to do the magic. You have to find the right word. But it's also not so complicated. Yom Kippur, we read the Torah portion about Yom Kippur in Acherimot, Leviticus. Chanukah, we read about the dedication of the sanctuary, the tabernacle. Purim, we read about the war of Amalek against the Jewish people. Haman came from Amalek. Passover, Pesach, we read the portion of the Torah about the Exodus of Egypt and the first Passover offering. The same is true with Sukkot, etc. Now, I want to ask you a question. Rosh Hashanah, we celebrate the anniversary of creation. So if you were part of a committee, okay, you were all part of a committee to decide what should we read in the Torah on Rosh Hashanah. Which portion would you choose? Bereshit. In the beginning, God created heaven and earth. It's no brainer. And then he said, let there be man, and everything went downhill from there. And then Adam found a wife, and everything went uphill from there. The question is why she's the only one applauding. All of the men are going to pay dearly for this Freudian omission. Right? It's no brainer. That's not what we read on Rosh Hashanah. We don't mention it. We don't read about. Both days, and in the Haftarah, we read about the struggle to give birth to children and raise children. We read about the birth of Ishmael and the birth of Isaac, Yitzchak. We learn about the relationship between Abraham and Yitzchak, and how Yitzchak was almost sacrificed and then saved at the last moment. In the Haftarah, we learn about Hannah, who couldn't have children. And she went to pray, and she was given a child who became the prophet Shmuel, the prophet Samuel. We read about Rachel, Mevaka, Albanah, Rachel weeping for her children. I don't understand what happened. We're talking about the theme of Rosh Hashanah. The answer, my dear friends, is very simple and very deep. And that is for the Jewish people. You know how we celebrate the universe, the creation of the universe? By focusing on our children. We commemorate the creation of the world, not by talking about black holes, not by talking about black matter, not by talking about the galaxies, even though they're astounding and incredible. We should talk about it. But how do we celebrate the anniversary of creation and the anniversary of Adam and Eve? By tuning in to the future and safety of our children. That's the key. There's another story in the Torah, very, very enigmatic. It's the story about the brothers who sell Joseph into slavery. But not before wanting to kill him. And then Reuven, the older brother, says, don't kill him, throw him into the pit. He's thinking when they go away, he'll take him out and bring him back to his father. He went away, they went to eat, and in the meantime they sold him into slavery to the Egyptians. He went to Egypt, and when Reuven came back, his brother wasn't there. And they made this whole story that he was killed by an animal. 22 years later, the brothers came down to Egypt to get food. Joseph is the prime minister, and he arrests them and he accuses them of espionage. Reuven, the oldest brother, turns to his brothers in Genesis in the case, and he says, as the brothers are confessing their sins to each other, they say, we're guilty for what happened. We're not spies, but we're guilty. We know why we're in prison. Because we were deaf to the cry of our brother. 22 years earlier, we were deaf to our brother's cry. That's why we are now being accused of being spies and thrown into prison. Now, when somebody comes to you and makes a confession and says, 22 years ago I did the most horrible thing, and they're sobbing, what's the right thing to say? What's the right thing to say? Now, try to say something comforting. Right? If your husband comes to you and says, 22 years ago, I did this stupid, did it ever happen? Maybe it'll happen. 22 years ago, I did the stupidest thing ever. And he's sobbing like a baby. At such a moment, we say, I'm sorry. Let's see what we can do to repair. What does Reuven tell them? Classic. He says, I told you. I told you al techtu b'yeled. I told you don't sin against the child. They were saying, because our brother was abused by us, al ken ba'a aleinu atzara azot. That's why we're suffering now. And he said, I told you. The end of the conversation. What type of response is this? And what's the point? And even if he said it, why did the Torah put it in? I'm going to keep this question open for a few minutes. I'm going to change the subject to 2023. Not really change the subject. I want to share with you what I feel. It may sound a little harsh, but it's fine. It should really be said. It should be said with more harshness. History is going to show us, and history is going to tell us, that one of the greatest failures of the Orthodox community in the last half a century was the way we dealt with child abuse. The Orthodox community post-Holocaust is a miracle. Nobody thought this will happen. In 1945, the Jewish people were reduced to ashes. And those who were survived. So many were alienated from Judaism and faith. And it was a handful of teachers and leaders who revolutionized the landscape of Yiddishkeit in Israel and around the whole world. And those first few years, everybody thought it was futile. Today, when you look at the growth of the world of Judaism and the world of Torah in terms of education, in terms of social activities, in terms of infrastructure, in terms of communities, both in the Holy Land and across the world, including in this beautiful community right here in Mexico City, it's astounding. And yet, we sometimes have a flaw. And the flaw is we get defensive when we hear the truth. That means we're not confident. A confident person could take a criticism. A confident husband could be told by his wife exactly what he is. True? And he doesn't run away. He doesn't run away. Confidence means that I can face myself in the mirror. I can look at my flaws, I can look at my mistakes, and I can be open to change, even if it hurts. Perhaps decades ago, we were still so insecure, and still with the trauma of the Holocaust and all of the other problems, we were afraid to expose ourselves to any confession, to say, oh, we have a problem, we have a flaw, who knows what's going to come next? To do that today is unforgivable and unjustified. And I think history is going to show us that this has been a colossal failure on every level. Organizational, social, and sadly, rabbinic. In most cases, not in all, it wasn't malicious. It was based on ignorance. Some cases, it was more than ignorance. But in many cases, at least a few decades ago, there was a lot of ignorance. I include myself among the ignorant. I heard stories here and there, but I didn't appreciate the severity. I did not appreciate the consequences. As a result, on an institutional level, I know where I grew up in New York, and in Israel, and in the biggest communities around the world, and this community is no exception. But all over the world, there was the attitude of shh, shh, shh. In Yiddish they said, "Medaktish." You don't talk. We talk, schweigen, stigen. However they do it in your language, the same consequence. The victims suffer, and they know very well that silence is the most important characteristic that they must cultivate for survival and to gain the approval of their parents, and not to be seen as the embodiment of the devil in their community, the ones who are destroying our glorious past and our glorious future. Silence became the message that was communicated consciously and unconsciously to anyone who even thought of opening their mouth. When a principal or a rabbi or a leader or a mentor or a parent would hear a story when a child did have the courage to come home and say to Tati or Mommy, to Abba or Ima, to Daddy, maybe to a principal in school, maybe to the rabbi in the synagogue, maybe to another important activist in the community, a leader, a philanthropist, and share the story. So often the child was not believed. The perpetrator was believed rather than the child. How many mothers and fathers, how many teachers or principals turned to the child and said, "It can't be. Chaya? Chaya? Atzadik! Chaya? Atzadik!" This lowlife, Chaim, I don't know Chaim. If there's a Chaim here, it's your ninth cousin. I don't know why I'm picking on Chaim. Chaim's a nice name. But it could be Yaakov, it could be Shmedel, it could be Yosef, it could be Double, it could be Michael. If you want, we could do Stephen or Jack. We're not going to do Isaac. My name is Yitzchak. But it could be Yitzchak, it could be Yosef, it could be anybody. Not only, there's an expression in Tanakh, there's a story in the Book of Kings. There was a Jew named Nevot Israeli. He had a beautiful vineyard. And the king, Achab, and his wife, Isabella, they wanted his vineyard. He didn't want to give it to them. So she hired false witnesses to maintain and claim that he cursed the king. He was executed, and she stole the vineyard for herself and her husband. And Elijah the prophet came to the king, and he said 3 words. Haratzachta v'gam yarashta. You murder, and then you inherit too. Not enough you murdered an innocent man who owned the vineyard. Now you take his vineyard. And Eliyahu told him exactly what his fate is going to be, he and his wife. So this abuser, first he murders the child, and now he's believed. He's the tzaddik. Father says, he can't be. Look how he davens in shul. Of course, I would also daven like that. If I knew I was facing the hell he's facing, I would also daven. Of course he davens like that in shul. People are compartmentalized. People are split. It can be the people closest. You know the story. There was a man in Israel, in Bnei Brak. He was considered one of the top therapists in the Orthodox community. He wrote some of the best children's books. My house was filled with them. Many of your houses had them. They were excellent books. They're still excellent books. He had a column in one of the greatest newspapers in the Orthodox Lithuanian literature community in Bnei Brak, called Yatet Naman. Friday, the center column to explain the Hashkafa, how to teach and inspire your children, was his column. He educated a generation. If there was a crisis with a child was displaying signs of abuse. Who did they go to? They went to him. He was the expert. Imagine, and this went on for 25 years. In Bnei Brak, the city that's supposed to represent Torah. And there were rabbis who were told about it 20 years ago. But silence is our comfort zone. Why make waves? Powerful person, a scholar, popular, a writer. And who are you going to believe? You're going to believe some disgruntled kid or teenager who's anyway suffering from depression? Of course he's suffering from depression. He's being molested every week by this guy. You understand what was happening here? And finally, I have to say this, and forgive me. Finally, it took a rabbi from the Zionist world, not from the Bnei Brak world, Rabbi Shmuel Eliyahu from Tzfat, outside of the community, who listened to the testimony of 22 women, and he decided that 22 mothers are probably not lying. Probably. I spoke to Rabbi Shmuel Eliyahu. He told me how much opposition he had. And then this man, and now I know why I said the name Chaim. I just realized. I'm not so dumb. I had a classmate every time I was bored at night, but not last night. Now I know why I used the name Chaim. When he shot himself, the chutzpah, as I told somebody, it was the one mitzvah he did in his life. The one mitzvah he did in his life is he got rid of a serial child molester by killing himself. And in that newspaper, they wrote, Zecher Tzadik Livracha. Zecher Tzadik Livracha. What does that tell us? What does that do to the boys, yeshiva boys, who have a secret, and they see that at an institutional level, there could be so much corruption? Now, we have a hard time listening to this language because somebody gets up and speaks and they say, he loves bashing the Orthodox community, especially the Haredim, the black hats, the beards. So I wear a black hat. Not now, I don't share. I have a beard. I put on 2 pairs of tefillin. I'm not going in a white suit. I have a black coat. I send my children to very Orthodox yeshivas. But we, as a community, if we don't stand up to the evil, to the injustice, what is it all worth? What is the Torah worth? What is prayer worth? What is Shabbat worth? What is charity worth? When the vulnerable among us, those cute angelic children whose lives get destroyed for decades, instead of being protected by their parents, by their educators, by their rabbis, by their mentors, by their supporters, by the entire community through thick and thin, they're the ones who are demonized. There was a letter that went out after his suicide saying that to tell a story about him that he was a rapist is Lashon Hara, gossip. I got a few hundred emails of victims of this. Some of them were victims of this. And they wrote to me how re-traumatized they were. They're the culprits, and they were accused of murdering him. Why did he commit suicide? Because they came out against him, so who's guilty? Do you understand what this man does? He murders his victims emotionally. And then when they finally want to get some help, he kills himself, and now they're accused of being the murderers, and he's the victim. The murderer became the victim, and the victims became the murderers. Does that make sense? These are people who are supposed to represent God. I realized early on in the game, if this is the God they want me to worship, I'm out. This is idolatry. This is paganism. In pagan culture, they used to take children and sacrifice them. They took children and sacrificed them to their gods. You could read in history, you could read it in the Bible. It was called the Moilach, it was called the Baal. God wanted these kids to die for his sake. Is that the religion that we have embraced? So we don't burn the children alive, but we let them burn clandestinely. We let them commit suicide. Where I live in Muncie, there's a cemetery, 4 or 5 graves of teenagers who took their lives. Each one of them went through horrific trauma of sexual abuse or other forms of abuse. They didn't live in a culture that embraced them and allowed them to talk and encouraged them to talk and created awareness and inculcated in the souls and minds of every person with influence that we believe our children, and we don't have more compassion on perpetrators than we have on victims. So for so many years, this message that was communicated to so many people, directly or indirectly, was, first of all, if you're going to come, we're not going to believe you. You're going to tell me that your older brother, very often it's in the family. It's not strangers. Probably most cases are family members. An older brother, an uncle, an aunt, a babysitter, a first cousin, a neighbor, a good friend of the family, a frequent guest of the family. In some crazy situations, it could be a father. In some crazy situations, it could be a grandfather. I get emails every single week from people who were sexually abused by grandparents. Now imagine, this guy is a tzaddik in Borough Park. He has a long white beard. He's 82 years old. He has 306 grandchildren. You understand? And they write, he sits and learns all day. He sits and learns all day. He's a tzaddik, he's holy. But this grandchild can't sleep at night. This grandchild is suicidal. This grandchild is suffering from depression and anxiety and can't function. But the children got the message. We may not believe you. The story just doesn't make sense. I was once in Florida for an addiction retreat. Before I went to my room, it was Friday night, it was late. I'll never forget. I went over to a table to say Shabbat Shalom. These were all religious kids who left Judaism. Each one of them went through terrible trauma. So they all left Judaism. It was just too painful for them to associate with the community. And they were sharing with me their stories. One of them, he's probably 35, and he tells me how painful it is because he has like 100 cousins, one of these big Brooklyn families. And they had 60 children, and everybody got married and has kids, and every night there's another simcha. And he says at every wedding, his aunts come over to him and say, no, when are you getting married? And he says, I can't get married. I'm a destroyed person. I'm trying to heal for years. I have nightmares. I have social anxiety. I can't have relationships. My sexuality is compromised. I said, what happened? And he shared with me the story. An older brother abused him. An uncle abused him. Another person abused him. And he said, I opened up to my father at 19. And my father said, stop lying. And he looked at me and he said, Rabbi, why that was more painful than all the years of molestation. Because my father's supposed to protect me. I have to contain myself from crying when I say this. Maybe I shouldn't. He says that was worse than the trauma. That's what his father said to him. Stop lying. That was his message. Children get the message very clearly. You're quiet, you'll do well. But they can't do well. Some of them manage to triumph over it, but some of them are emotionally affected for life. And they have to seek all forms of healing modalities to come out of it. And I want to tell you something. Sometimes the trauma happens at such a young age, they don't even have a memory of it. Sometimes you can be sexually abused or abused in other ways, and it's so painful that your conscious memory shuts it down. You're full of anxiety, you can't function, you don't know why. And you're blaming yourself. And they're learning Musar, and they're learning good books, and they're doing more mitzvot, and they're praying more. Their body, their nervous system has been severely damaged. Not only that, sometimes when it happens at a very young age, this Dr. Bessel van der Kolk told me personally. He wrote the book, The Body Keeps the Score. He's one of the leading trauma experts today. And he told us to me, I asked him, what happens if you're sexually abused at the age of 3 or 4? He says, then it's not that you have trauma, you are trauma. He said, that's why you don't remember it. To remember something, there has to be an I that remembers an event. But he said, that very eye is the trauma. So who do you want you to remember that event? Your eye is based on that trauma. Do you understand the emotional damage that this does to a person? A victim once told me, he said, Rabbi Jacobson, I'm not saying this lightly, if the perpetrator would have shot me, I would have been dead. Today, I die again every single day. We need to understand this. People who don't understand the effects should not be in the world of education. They should not be in the rabbinate. They should also not be parents. But we are parents. We are educators. We are teachers. We have to educate ourselves. We have to listen to victims. We have to know the impact. We have to read the literature. Today there is so much out there that I don't have an excuse of ignorance anymore. We don't have that excuse anymore. Nor do we have the excuse. This is one of the worst. Chilul Hashem. Ever heard that one? If you speak, it's going to be Chilul Hashem. Chilul Hashem. I tell you, the worst desecration of God's name is what was done to God in the name of protecting God by protecting perpetrators. There's no greater Chilul Hashem than allowing such injustice to brew in our midst. And then we blame Kiddush Hashem. That's Kiddush Hashem. Kiddush Hashem is to take criminals and get rid of them. That's Kiddush Hashem. Kiddush Hashem is that people know that Torah inspires us to protect children, not to demonize children. And what about the Chilul Hashem that was done to all those children? How many were alienated from God forever? How many of them can't walk into a shul? How many of them hate Yom Kippur and Rosh Hashanah and Shabbat? I once gave a lecture on Shabbat, and a boy came over to me afterwards, in his 20s. And he said, beautiful lecture, but not for me. I said, why? And he looked at me, he said, because my abuse happened Friday night in shul. Because nobody stays in shul Friday night, everybody goes home for the meal. So that's when the predator would molest me every Friday night. For me, Shabbos equals abuse. I can't keep Shabbos. If I keep Shabbos, it's a death sentence for me. And he started to cry and he said, maybe one day I'll be able to keep Shabbos. Now he's blamed for not keeping Shabbos. He's blamed, he's a tzaddik. His soul is too real, his soul is too sensitive. He doesn't want to identify with Shabbat and with a God and with a Yiddishkeit that can allow for such corruption in the synagogue. When we see the holiness and sensitivity of these souls, they're often much holier than anybody else. I know of a situation that's happened in Brooklyn. There was an older boy who was driving with his mother. They stopped at a red light. He was by the wheel. And somebody crossed. And he tells his mother, if I would have had guts, I would take the car and drive over him. She didn't expect this from her sensitive child. She looks out and she says, he was the principal in your school. Yeah, that's why I want to run him over. It took her a long time to hear the story from him. This is a Hasidic family in Brooklyn, okay? The Hasidim are not into wearing fancy label design sneakers. Even if you wear sneakers, they can be simple sneakers. But the real good sneakers, it's not for them. This boy came home as a little kid, and he asked his parents if they could buy him beautiful, what was then very popular type of sneaker that came out of the market, and it was something else. If you wore these sneakers, you were some form of Feinschmecker. They said, no, we don't. What do you need this for? He says, for recess sports. For recess sports. It's easier to run. No, you don't need it. He asked them for 6 months for the sneakers. They didn't want to get it. And then he tells his mother around 10 years later. 10 years he kept the secret. And what does he say? Every day, during recess, during the break, the principal would call him into the office. It's a horrible story. The door was locked. He gave him chocolate. He gave him Danishes. He gave him Coca-Cola. He gave him some sushi. And then he sat him down on his lap. And he sexually molested him. He tells his mother, what were my friends doing? They were playing ball. I'm not a good ball player. I'm not athletic. So they didn't ask me to come to the teams. I was hoping that if I have these sneakers, the kids would be so impressed, they would take me into the game, so I would have an excuse not to go to the principal's office. That's why I was asking for the sneakers. Poor mother. Poor mother. She just was trying to tell her child, we don't buy these sneakers, we're not into it. How was she supposed to know? But what does this teach us? We have to be so attentive to our children. We need to listen to our children. We need to listen to what they say, and we need to listen to what they don't say. We need to spend time with them casually. Sometimes they don't speak for years. Sometimes they don't even know what to say. Sometimes they don't remember anything. But we must be so careful and sensitive and attuned to their emotions. And when they were getting the message that they're barely going to be believed, who wants to come out and speak and be demonized? And even when somebody did speak, often the message was, quiet. Nobody's going to accept you. As a girl told me, her mother said when she told her the story, you're going to ruin all the shidduchim in the family. Do you understand? You're going to ruin all the shidduchim in your family, and no one else. If you don't speak, you'll get a good shidduch. You're not going to get a good shidduch. Now, what is this telling a child? First of all, it tells you that your internal emotional world is worthless. It's valueless, it's insignificant, it doesn't even exist, it doesn't matter. What matters is what everyone thinks. Impressions, externalities. This is what Hashem is about. Absolute fakeness, absolute inauthenticity. This is why Jews sacrificed their lives to preserve Judaism for 4,000 years, through the worst of the worst. So we should be able to tell our children, all that matters is that our family should look good and look perfect, because in our family these things don't happen, even though you are being destroyed internally. Who cares? Be like me, I was also destroyed internally. A parent once told me, you think I wasn't molested? You put one foot ahead of another foot, and you move on and you make believe it didn't happen. And I told the father, well, you thank your child, because he doesn't want to live a broken life like you did. He wants to live a wholesome life. He wants to deal with his emotions. He wants to be happy. He wants to have a real marriage. He wants to have a real relationship. He doesn't want to walk around with a depression and anxiety. He wants to be able to love God. He wants to be able to love life. He wants to be able to smell the roses, and he wants to be able to be authentic. Maybe for you, there was no other choice. You had to cut down your emotions. You had to amputate your emotions. But your child is not accepting that. Our children today are not accepting what we accepted. It's because of their greatness. It's because of the generation of redemption. They don't want to live with suppressed and repressed trauma, which debilitates people, which destroys marriages, which destroys intimacy, which doesn't even allow us to have a spiritual connection. How can I have a spiritual connection when I don't even feel myself, when I'm disassociated, when I'm detached? How? Our children are saying, we want truth. We want authenticity, so that infections come out. We get afraid. Oh, we don't have infections. It's an opportunity. We have today a historical opportunity to heal the Jewish world. But the only way we're going to heal the Jewish world is if we can identify the disease, if we can identify the illness, if we can identify the infections, and realize that we're bigger than this. We don't have to be afraid. We don't have to be insecure. Another argument was always the perpetrator has a family. That was a big one. I used to get emails from people, you are single-handedly responsible for destroying the entire family of the perpetrator. First of all, it's not true. And even if it is true, what are you doing to his wife and children? I get it. And every normal person should have empathy for the wife of a perpetrator, if she's not involved. And for the children of the perpetrator who are innocent victims. But I don't understand. We allow the victim to be demonized and traumatized because we feel bad for the perpetrator. He should be the one thinking about his family. He's the one who destroyed his family. Why is the victim responsible for the fact that he destroyed the family? I was speaking to a famous educator, and he was arguing with me. I said, I want to ask you a question, okay? Honestly, if there was a fellow who came into your school every Friday, and he shot one child, he shot one child dead. And you heard rumors that he's the gunman. Would you call the police or would you not call the police? What would you do? Would you go to the rabbi and tell the rabbi, this guy is shooting a child every week? And the rabbi would say, what am I supposed to do? We'll make a meeting in a month. In a month we'll decide that we have to make a committee. We'll make another committee to have another meeting. And then we're going to call them in and say, you should move to Israel. That's what used to be done. Send them to Israel so you can murder another 100 kids in Bnei Brak or Jerusalem. Great idea. He's abusing kids in Melbourne, send him to South Africa. Oh, South Africa found out, send him to New York. Why not? There's 4 million Jews in New York, so we have another molester. What a shanda. And in many cases, ignorance. I'll call him and I'll speak to him. I'll talk to him as though pedophilia was just something you have a conversation about. You're talking about a serious disease. Serious disease. Now I want to ask you a question. When you call the police about that gunman, and somebody says to you, how do you call the police on a man who's shooting children? He's going to end up in prison for 104 years. What about his wife and his children? And what's the principal going to say? Yeah, I'm so sorry for his wife and his children. I am so sorry. So that's why I should allow a 6-year-old boy to die every week by a bullet wound because I feel bad for his wife and his children. Does that make sense to anybody? Of course I feel bad for his wife and children. I feel terrible for that. We should be there for them. And they're not to blame. And they're not to be demonized if they're not busy protecting the perpetrator. But where did we get this foolish idea that the victim is the culprit for that? It just doesn't make sense. But this was a major argument between Chilul Hashem and the perpetrator's family. Why we can't talk, why we can't expose them. The real challenge is that even when there's awareness, and even when you talk about it to your children, and even when the schools have important and vital programs to educate staff, to educate children, to create awareness in the community, the challenge is that sometimes it hits in such an unexpected way that parents who did everything right find out that they did everything wrong. How are you supposed to protect your little son against an older brother? Or a sister against a brother? Or cousins, or friends, or babysitters? And what if it's family itself? And here's where the crisis is worse. Because now, when somebody comes and approaches mommy and tati, the family's going to get destroyed. It's the brother. So I'm going to send my son to prison. I'm going to send my brother to prison, the uncle. I'm going to send my father to prison. Who am I going to send to prison? I'm going to send my brother-in-law to prison. I'm going to send my nephew to prison. And therefore, we naturally and instinctively demonize again the victims and say, you can't talk about this. Ever. But that's a terrible, terrible crime. How guilty does this poor girl feel that she came to tell her father what happened, and now she's responsible for destroying the whole family and her brother. Not only is she living with endless anxiety and depression and trauma and a lack of complete self-confidence because of the abuse, now she's to blame for the destruction of the family. This is not fear. We can't stand idle when the blood of our children is spilling, and we know so much today about the effects and the impact. Does it have to be dealt with sensitivity and compassion? Of course. But to ignore, to repress, to suppress, heaven forbid. Those days are over. Those days created a curse for so many families, for so many people, so much anguish, so much suffering. Yes, the road has to be navigated with deep sensitivity, with love, with understanding, with compassion. It's called using seichel, using the heart, understanding what's ultimately going to be best for the victim, talking to people who are experts, who are professional, who care. But the attitude should never be silencing victims, re-traumatizing them, making them feel guilty for saying the truth. I could talk about this for a few days, so this is where we're all like. Still won't be enough. I want to come back to the story of Reuven, and you will see the depth of the story. Reuven was a good man. He wasn't trying to tell his brothers, told you should have listened to your older brother, you arrogant kids, 22 years later you're suffering. That's not what happened. Reuven was telling them and teaching them how to do tshuva, how to repent. And he was showing them that they are still making the same mistake. And this is very subtle and profound. You know what they said? They said, since we were deaf to our brothers, since we were deaf to our brothers' pleas, he begged us not to throw him into a pit. He begged us not to sell him as a slave. We were deaf. We didn't listen. That's why we are now experiencing this anguish, this calamity. That's why we were arrested. That's why the Prime Minister of Egypt thinks we're spies. And Reuven said, guys, you still didn't get it. You know why? You're focusing on your punishment. You're focusing on the consequences. I told you, don't sin against a child. You don't get it. You're talking about your own pain. You're still not experiencing what you did to the child. What Reuven was saying is so relevant because today, when there is awareness, when so many victims approached the lecterns and spoke out, not enough, but plenty. When DAs take it more seriously, when principals and rabbis and leaders take it more seriously, often what's the approach? The approach is, if I don't get my synagogue in order, if I don't get my school in order, I'm going to be shut down. There's going to be a lawsuit. Schools were sued by victims. There were some very famous court cases. So people are scared. I don't want to have to deal with it. So therefore I'm going to put in all the safety guidelines so I should be able to protect me and my institutions. Reuven said, you still don't get it. You're still busy covering your own skin. Can you feel the pain of the child? Imagine a couple. They were married for many years, and then you'll forgive me for my metaphor. And the husband betrayed the wife in a very serious way. And he thought it'll be a secret. She found out, and one day she confronts him. They go to therapy. And the therapist turns to the husband and says, what do you say? He says, I feel so bad, I made a terrible mistake. Why did you make a terrible, what was the mistake? The wife says, what was the mistake? And the husband says, well, I see what it did to you. I see how affected you were. I see how I hurt your feelings. I see how you can't sleep. I see how you have anxiety. I see how you're in such an anxious mood. He wants to, at that point, get a gold medal. Instead, his wife shuts down and is so disappointed. He doesn't know what happened. What happened was she's trying, she's hoping that you will feel the pain that you caused, not only her, that you caused yourself, that you will regret it inside. It's not like, you're sensitive and I said the wrong thing, I'm sorry. Can you really identify with the pain of what happened? Reuben wants them to feel the pain of Yosef. There's a second thing, his blood is being demanded. But the first thing is the child. And this is the profound awareness that we need to cultivate in our times. There was a very famous rabbi from Slovakia, Rabbi, and he lost his family in the war. And after the war, he himself was sent to Auschwitz. He jumped out of the train. He survived. He built a yeshiva in Mount Israel. Michael Ber Weissman. He died in 1958, a young man. After the war, he came back to the shul of his father-in-law. And survivors were there. Rosh Hashanah. And before they took out the Torah, he stood up and he said, my father-in-law, the night Rav, before the reading of the Torah, used to make an announcement. You know how they do with the synagogues. Any child who's running around and making noise, please take yourself outside and make the noise there. Here it has to be quiet when we read the Torah. So that's what my father-in-law used to announce before the reading of the Torah. He says, I want to make a different announcement. If there's any child in the shul, please make noise. Please cry, please scream, please run around, anybody. There was not one child. They were all murdered. There was not one child to make noise. For so many years, we made that announcement. If there's any children who want to make noise, go somewhere else. In this community, we don't make noise. In this community, shh. This community, we're perfect. The statistics are, and this I heard from, I can't tell you how many therapists, psychologists, psychiatrists who deal with this, that 1 in 4, or 1 in 5, or even if you want to extend the numbers a little bit, of females or males has some sexual trauma before puberty. That can mean many things. It can mean rape, it can mean molestation, it can mean pornography, it can mean exposure to things, but when puberty happens, there are serious challenges in their development. These are mind-staggering statistics. Even if the numbers in some cases fluctuate in this direction or that direction. So after years of saying, please, if you want to scream, go outside of the shul, go outside of the school, go outside of the home, go outside of the community. Our historic mission is to change that. And to say, children, scream, cry, talk, communicate. We will listen to you. We will believe you. We will embrace you. And we always remember that as we cry, there's a rhythm. Tkiya, Shvarim, Trua, Tkiya. When we're all born with simplicity, with trust, with purity, with love. Tkiya, do. But life breaks us, Shvarim. What does Shvarim sound like? A sigh. I don't know who blows the shofar here in Mexico City, but if you listen well, Shvarim means brokenness. And then there's Trua, sobs. It's what happens in life. I'm born with love, with so much trust. I want to connect. And then my heart is shattered into 5,000 pieces by the time I'm 6 or 7 years old. And instead of getting the love that I don't feel I can get, now I start looking for validation, for attention. And that's the story of so many lives. I'm really looking for love and attachment, but I replace it with other temptations to make me feel good. We go through Shvarim, we go through Trua. We sigh and we sob. We're broken, and we sometimes break others, sometimes unintentionally. And every one of these victims, in one way or another, went through their tkiya and their shvarim and their tshuva. But if there's one message that Judaism really tried to teach us for 4,000 years, it is this. After shvarim and tshuva, you can reclaim your tkiya. Nobody is broken to the point that they're beyond repair. Nobody can snuff out your soul. Nobody can destroy the core of your consciousness. If the soul is a chelik elekami mal mamish, as the Tanya says, every Jewish soul is a derivative of infinite consciousness. Just like nobody can destroy Hashem, nobody can destroy the core of your neshama, the core of your guf. Because it's sacred, it's divine. All the possibility, all the potentiality, all the joy, all the confidence, all the creativity, curiosity, compassion, caring, courage, it's still there. It was just eclipsed by layers and layers of cover-ups. But from the shvarim and the trua, if I can have the courage to be able to go into my pain, I have to be able to search where my treasure was lost. You don't search for something that was lost in the place where it's easy to find, because that's not where it was lost. I have to go to the place where it was lost. I have to have the courage to look under my scabs, under my survival mechanisms, under my layers of cover-ups, and I will find the treasure of love. Moshe says to the Jewish people at the end of his life. And then from the shvarim and the trua, I will reclaim my tkiya, my innocence, my purity. But remember, the last tkiya is a tkiya g'dayla. It's much greater and much longer than the first tkiya. The first tkiya when we're born is relatively short. But the tkiya that comes after brokenness, the healing that comes post-trauma, the recovery and the appreciation of life that comes after I faced my own pain, I faced my adversity. I didn't look away. I looked my own devil in the eyes. And I said, I will not let you win, because I am innocent, because I am divine, because I am pure. Then you reach the ultimate tkiya, the real tkiya, the tkiya g'dayla, the tkiya that never ends. It's the tkiya that brings back ha'oivdim beretz Asher, ha'nidachim beretz Mitzrayim, those who felt lost and rejected and outcast. Because we changed the question, instead of looking at them and saying, what's wrong with you? We look at them and we say, what happened to you? And that makes all the difference. Thank you very much.
Muchas gracias.